All right, the Minding Your Business podcast. We're here, episode number 216, and we're into November of 2020. I'm your host, Champ Ron, recording this on November the 2nd. If you're listening to this kind of near November the 2nd, you're coming off the Halloween weekend, so hope you enjoyed that with you and your family, if that's something that you chose to engage in, or maybe you just had a nice, relaxing weekend to yourself or with friends or family and loved ones. So hope that whatever you've done or are doing, that this podcast finds you well. Entrepreneurship, real estate, trending news. There's no business like minding your own. Very excited about today's guest. But before we get to her, definitely subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Share this with 5 of your friends and 6 of your enemies. To go to wherever you get your pods. 5-star helps us continue to grow the MYB community. And of course, you can always find me at champronbrooks.com. Listen, our guest today joins us all the way from Portugal. Beautiful country. I have not had the chance to visit. I've only visited through Google Earth and some other places, and then reading books, of course, where we get a chance to travel there. And that's actually what we're going to get into today. So Laura Gale is our guest today. She is a ghostwriter. And again, they're in the Portugal area, and just a tremendous background. She's worked on many phenomenal projects that you're aware of, whether it's the Twilight series or some of the post J.K. Rowling stuff, post Harry Potter. That includes memoirs with Michael Palin, which I'm sure he had a lot to say, Nelson Mandela, and Tina Fey. And what we're going to talk about today is kind of her background, and we'll define ghostwriting. We'll define ghostwriting, compare and contrast that pre-pandemic to the current pandemic now. And many things we'll get into. Laura is also the author of How to Write This Book, Write, Publish, and Market Your Business Bestseller, as well as and Content That Converts, How to Build a Profitable and Predictable B2B Content Marketing Strategy. These are both Amazon top-selling books, and definitely ones that you should go and check out. And we'll talk about that more here in a second. And then she's a podcaster, so she's the co-host of the Business of Writing podcast, which MYB, you know how we are with podcasters. We like to show a lot of love, and I want to make sure when you get done listening to this podcast, make sure that you subscribe to Laura's podcast, the Business of Writing podcast. I'm doing that as well. And make sure you also leave a 5-star positive written comment. Don't just hit the stars and walk away. Okay. Leave a nice listen to it. Don't just BS around, listen to it, and then leave a positive comment so that Laura and her team can grow that podcast. So with that being said, after I give a 1,000-minute, introduction for Laura, here she is, Laura Gale. Thank you for being on.
It was great. You need to walk around with me and just hype my life.
Yeah. So I'm good for giving, the 1,000-minute, introduction. And then everybody's like, okay, land the plane and let's get to the guest. Right. So, Laura, thank you so much again for joining. I really appreciate it. And let's jump right in. So tell us, for those that aren't familiar with you, tell us about your journey and your background to getting to what you're doing today in ghostwriting.
Well, I grew up in one of those weird reading families where everybody was curled up with books rather than watching TV or going outside. So books had been a big part of my life for a very long time. I went to university and studied writing and publishing, and then got a free internship. I was not paid to go and work as a very, very junior publicist in one of the very, very big publishing houses in the world. And after about a year of turning up every week and licking envelopes and sending books in the mail, I was offered a job when a more senior publicist left, which meant that I then kind of got to work on all of those cool projects that you mentioned earlier. I was still pretty junior at the time, but it was all of those projects were just a really amazing way to learn the ropes. And, publicity kind of comes at the end of the traditional publishing process. So you're kind of at that point where the author is just like, just get this thing out. I'm over it, just get it done. And so, I spent a lot of time being like, we're going to have a party. We're going to go to a festival. We're going to get cool book reviews. It's going to be great. So, right. My role was kind of make it fun at the end and make sure the book actually sells to make it worth all of this effort and time that has gone into the process. So that was quite an amazing learning experience. And after a while, I kind of thought like, I love this, but the book industry is not keeping up with Amazon. There's all of this tech change going on. There's like so much happening in this industry, but you know, the big established companies are not moving with the times, and I don't want to get left behind. So I thought, okay, I need to kind of figure out how to do this on my own. And I quit my job, moved overseas where it was much cheaper than where I was living, which I grew up in Sydney. So it's a pretty expensive town to live in when you're kind of getting set up in your first business. So yeah, moved overseas, started freelancing, content marketing, copywriting, that kind of thing. And then eventually somebody asked me if I could help them with a book, since, you know, I had worked in publishing and should therefore know how to write a book. So I gave that a shot, and it kind of went much better than I had expected. And over the next year or so, it kind of just snowballed into so much interest in entrepreneurs writing books. And so now that's all I do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, Laura, as you're working on these projects, and you mentioned being, you know, younger in your career as you're doing that, do you get a chance to meet, you know, the individuals that you work with? You know, I guess at that point, when you're talking about the Tina Feys of the world and the Michael Palins and that sort of thing, are you meeting these people and kind of, you know, getting feedback and ideas from them, or are you kind of more working behind the scenes? And
it's much more behind the scenes at that level. I mean, maybe my boss was talking to their assistant or their production manager or whatever. You know, a lot of those, you know, very high profile people are very insulated from the process. So, you know, you might get an email, but it's rare that you're actually going to have a full-blown conversation with them or get to meet them, unless they are touring. And often that does happen. So obviously this year, pandemic-wise, that's not happening. But I did get to meet some really great authors, going to book festivals, because, you know, there are book festivals in many big cities, and it's very common that you would travel to a city, do some panels, sign some books, you know, meet and greet and everything. So I did get to meet a few cool people that way.
Yep. Excellent. And so, you know, talk about ghostwriting. So define it for us, because, you know, I want to make sure that people have a good understanding, and we'll get to some of the misconceptions and things like that. But just define what you do as a ghostwriter. What does that mean? And then what does that mean for someone listening, someone that's you know, whether a business owner or sales professional, or, you know, someone that's been interested in writing their own book or their own memoir, but Laura, they don't have the time, right? Or they don't feel they have the time or the dedication to really sit down and pen the manuscript. So can you define it for us?
So a ghostwriter is basically a writer that comes in and helps you tell your story. So my role, as I see it, is to sort of be a vessel between you and your reader. I shouldn't feature it all in the book. I just want it to be your words, your story, completely you, just kind of flowing through me, because I've got the skills and the ability and the time to do it. So that process is very collaborative. As I say, I want it to be completely the client. So that means setting a very clear strategic intent for the book, then doing a very immersive interview process where we kind of work through everything that you would want to include material wise. And then I take those recordings and turn them into a draft. And then once I've got the draft completed, I come back to you and say, okay, what needs to change? What doesn't sound like you? What doesn't feel quite right? Where are things missing? So it's very kind of collaborative. And I will also often invite people in the client's world, maybe their partners or their business partners, to come and read the book before we go to publication, to say, like, I've known you for 25 years. That's not quite how you would say that, or whatever. You know, we want it to sound exactly like them, because it becomes this ambassador for your business. You know, it's out there interacting with so many more people than you could ever possibly contact on your own or relate to on your own. And so you want every reader to have a really immersive, really authentic experience of who you are, because once they read the book, hopefully they're going to want to be in contact with you, want to do business with you. You know, they need to have a really consistent experience between what they've had in the book and what they have with you in person. So those two things really need to be aligned. So I spend a lot of the project making sure that we get that right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Laura, what are some of the misconceptions of ghostwriting? Yeah, because, you know, I can go through just my own experience. There are those that would have maybe negative things to say about ghostwriting in terms of, I guess, authenticity from the author. I don't think it's as much directed at, say, like a ghostwriter, his or herself, but more towards the author. So what are some of the one or two big misconceptions that you hear out there, and how do you kind of combat that in your business as you're talking to prospects?
So the first and most serious misconception is that using a ghostwriter is cheating somehow, that you are lying to your audience maybe by not being the ones to type the words on the page.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of a logical fallacy, because if the words have come from you and all of the experiences and stories and all the wisdom and experience have come from you, and
Sure.
I've just been the one to type it, that's not really being inauthentic. As I say, I'm sort of this vessel that the information flows through. And so it's not, there's nothing of me in that book. And I have no desire at all to take over, the relationship with that reader. And so it's very much in my interest to make sure it's as authentically the client as possible. The second big misconception is that it's this huge investment of time and energy for the client to work with a ghostwriter. In some very famous cases, that has been the case, but Andre Agassi, the tennis player, spent 2 years with a ghostwriter living in his house.
Right.
But that's very unusual. I'm not coming to your house. I'm sorry.
Right.
We're gonna do it online. So it's a very front-loaded process. My approach is to do usually 2 calls a week for the first 8 to 10 weeks. So that's usually about 2 to 3 hours a week of just conversations. And that's where all of that interview process happens. It's where all of the marketing ideas for the book happen. I want to make sure that we're kind of developing that stuff early on as well. But then when I'm drafting, it's nothing for the client. They can go back to their regular schedule. They don't need to be involved at all in that process. And then editing is kind of halfway. So you maybe have some time to read through the draft a couple of times and leave some feedback, but it's not a particularly demanding amount of time at that stage. And then you sort of get into publication, where obviously the client needs to be involved because launching is going on and there's all of this, media attention and all of this kind of interaction with your audience. So you do need to be the one to do that. But the actual production process is pretty light for the client most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Laura, in terms of, authoring a book or doing a manuscript or a memoir for a business owner, right? Or for an entrepreneur, how does, working with a ghostwriter benefit? I guess walk through the benefits for someone that's a business owner that may want to use a manuscript or a book or a memoir to help further progress their business or to help market, their products or services.
So like I said, a book becomes an ambassador for you and your business out in the world. It's really the ideal salesperson in that it doesn't take time off. It doesn't require holiday or sick leave or anything like that. It's always out there working.
Right.
And so you want that to be as polished and perfect as possible. Most people sort of start with this idea that they want to write something that's really beautiful. It's really impactful and powerful. And then when they sit down to write, they find that they just don't have the skills to make it sound how they want it to sound. And it's hugely frustrating, and so there's, that's kind of one big benefit of working with a ghostwriter is, if they've been writing for a long time, they do have the skills, and it's a completely different skill set. I went to university for this. I worked in the industry for a long time. I've been writing independently for, 15 years. It's a skill set I've spent a lot of time developing. And so it's no shame on the client that their skill in that area is not as developed as mine. My skill, for an accountant, say, who wants to write a book, I don't know how to do accounting. I don't know how to do tax returns, and I don't know how to do like all of these things, because that's not the skill set I've practiced over time.
Right.
And so the other key consideration is that for most business owners, most people who are interested in this process, so there's a better use of your time. Your ability to run your team, to look after your customers, to go out and get new business, that is all really mission critical stuff for your business. And so it's much more effective for you to leave this, which is very, in depth, is very time consuming. It requires a lot of attention and energy. Leave that to somebody else. It's not worth taking that amount of effort out of your business. When obviously you're writing the book because you want to grow your business and want to keep that momentum going. You don't want to stall what you've developed so that you can have the book.
Yeah. Well, I look at ghostwriting, and this is me personally, Laura. I look at it as a service no different than just about any product or service, right?
Exactly.
You mentioned like a mechanic. Is it cheating that you have a mechanic fix your car instead of you yourself, right? You say, "Oh, my car's running again." Oh, but you had a mechanic do it.
Right.
Well, I mean, hell, man. I can't do I don't know everything, right? You go to the grocery store, right? At least here in the States, I'm not sure. There in Portugal, maybe set up a little different, but here in the self-service grocery store, you go and get bread off the shelf. Well, someone else, did all the process that is required to get it on the shelf for you to pick it up. So,
and you hire designers to design your website and your branding. Nobody's saying that it's cheating to have somebody else represent your brand that way.
Right.
And, you hire people to work on your customer service and your marketing. Like it is backwards to me to think that because you weren't the one to do the work, that your vision and your knowledge isn't what's driving it.
Yeah. And quite frankly, and to some of your point earlier, and I've said this even in music, right? Because it gets talked about in music about having a ghostwriter and things like that. And some of the biggest songs that have ever been written had some level of ghostwriting on it. If you take any big musical act that we've ever had, that's always the case. And so it's always interesting to me that concept, or like you say, that misconception, because in a lot of ways a book's much better if you've had a ghostwriter because of that reason, the enhanced skill set of writing with someone who specialized in it, versus especially when you talk about business owners. Many haven't, obviously had any kind of heightened specialization in writing and how to portray, messages and things they want to get across. And so, that can make a huge difference for sure.
Absolutely. And the quality is a really important factor, I think, in how people respond to the book. If you've got a really clear information hierarchy is something I spend a lot of time developing with the client. What does the reader need to understand before we can progress through the rest of the information? What foundation do we need to lead with so that everything that you follow on with makes sense and is very easy for them to believe and buy into? And I think this is one of the most common issues, is that people jump around. They think, oh, I need to talk about this thing, so I'll just write it now. But if it's out of, a logical order, it just is really difficult for the reader to follow along. And, that's kind of a structural issue. But of course, there's, is it formatted properly? Is the spelling right? Are the words used correctly? Yes. There's just all of these things that in everyday communication, it's not a big problem. But when you're talking about something that's going to be a permanent representation of your brand and that a lot of people are going to be critically assessing, you want to get it right.
Yep, absolutely, Laura. And so for your books, I imagine you wrote your books, or did you use kind of a ghostwriting service as well? I was going to ask. Did you, how did you do that? So walk us through your process with your books. I mean, I guess, starting with, how to write this book, which I think is a tremendous title to have for someone in your position. But, start there, and then with, content that converts. Speak about those two books and kind of how they came about and how you went about writing those.
Well, both of those. So earlier on in my career, when I was doing more of the content marketing, I thought there are not that many books out there specifically focusing on the B2B area. There's lots and lots of content out there about how to do B2C stuff. So where you're sort of directly facing and directly interacting with your customers. But for a lot of people, so many businesses just interact with other businesses. And a lot of them would say, our stuff is boring. We sell PVC pipe, or we sell dirt, or, whatever. They sell like some software integration. Our stuff is boring. Nobody wants to read content about this. And I just don't think that's true. There's a huge amount of differentiation you can create in your business through content. And there is a way for it to be profitable and for it to be a revenue stream in your business that is predictable and reliable, but you do need a system for it. It's not just going to come together because you put out a blog every few weeks. Like, you do need to be kind of strategic about it. And I was seeing clients either really nailing this and just having a huge amount of success with it, or really struggling because they just didn't know how to put those pieces together. So that book was kind of a good opportunity that I saw to build a little bit of authority for myself in that space while I was still fairly new to it.
Yeah.
But also to kind of codify what that process needed to be and actually do something quite useful for people. The second book was very much along the same lines, where a lot of people want to use a book. A lot of people know how powerful it can be, but the system of doing it is just very daunting, and it feels like this black box. You know, you just don't know how to get into it. You don't know what's going to be in there once you start. And so it's really motivated by demystifying the process, because anyone can do it. You just need to have a system and a clear sort of step-by-step process that you can follow. I think when you have a process like that, even if you don't have the skill set really honed, you can still do a good job with it, because you kind of tick all the boxes that need to happen and you end up with something that's workable. So that was very much another kind of authority play for me, which, you know, is a huge motivation for people writing a book, is that they do want to establish themselves more as an authority, make themselves more visible, you know, really enhance their credibility. And so I use both of those books a lot at live events. Obviously, mid-pandemic, that's not happening so much, but it's amazing to be able to go to an industry event and say, here's a copy of my book. Take it back to your hotel room, have a read. Let's meet up at breakfast tomorrow and see what you think. You know, it's a very powerful sales tool. It's very tangible, and people feel very excited to receive something like that. It's so much more interesting than a business card. And so, you know, I was building my business a lot through going to events and just meeting people and talking. And so having physical proof of my process was really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you spoke a lot about the, you know, the tangible nature of the book. And I think that's, you know, where it creates a lot of value, particularly in the world that's become, you know, obviously so digitized, and everything from a convenience standpoint is easy to stick into a PDF and email around, but still receiving, like you say, that tangible, you know, kind of asset at that point that your book becomes. And so, you know, Laura, let me ask you, so for those that are listening and they want to, they may have an idea, or they may just know they want to write a book. They don't even know a subject, you know, content yet. At what point do you get involved, or like to get involved with someone who, you know, wants to write a book, and kind of walk through, you know, kind of from your service standpoint, how you help them do that? You know, do you help them conceptualize, you know, subject matter and things like that? Or do you prefer to kind of get involved once that piece of it's been vetted and they know exactly what direction they want to go?
So there are three ways that I usually interact with clients. The first, obviously, is the ghostwriting. That can be either where they're coming to me and saying, I'm an expert at this, I want to write a book. What do you think I should focus on? Or they come to me with a pretty clear idea about what they want to focus on, and then we can kind of develop the idea together. That is a very generative process. You know, it sort of starts with more or less just an idea or kind of a hint of an idea, and then we build that out together. So that's very collaborative, and I do love doing that. But for a lot of people, they come to me when they've already made a start. You know, maybe they're halfway through kind of where they need to go, and they're feeling like, oh, this is really hard work and I would like to not do this anymore. You know, and they want me to either take it over, or they are committed to finishing the writing but want someone to edit it. And so sort of give them that critical eye where this can be filled out more, this needs to be rearranged, let's, you know, tighten this bit up a bit. So that's more independent work. So I would usually come in once they've finished doing what they're going to do, and then I just help them fix it up and kind of make it a bit more manageable, a bit more presentable. And then there's the other option, which is coaching. And so coaching is usually where they want to do the writing themselves. They want to go through the whole process themselves. They want it to be completely theirs, but they need someone to keep them accountable. They need somebody to kind of kick them along, like, hey, you haven't sent your page count this week. We've got to keep this moving. You know, and so that's great for people who are either writers already or who are very comfortable writing and know sort of what they need to do to get it done. They just need someone to kind of corral them to the finish line.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura, we've kind of sprinkled this in our conversation. We talk about the pandemic, right? Of course, none of us saw that coming at the beginning of this year. And then, I guess for here in the United States around March, it really hit, and it affected, economy and things like that. From your standpoint with, utilizing the book as a tangible tool in, marketing and promoting one's business. Has anything changed that you've seen, as the pandemic has come on, and maybe for the better, maybe not so much, maybe things that you and your clients have had to adjust to? I know you mentioned earlier about events being one, obviously, with face-to-face events, but has there been any other things that you've kind of had to pivot through or maybe adjust, good or bad, that have maybe had an impact?
I've been really fortunate this year that more people than ever have wanted to write books. And that wasn't what I was expecting to have happen. I had this moment in March where I was like, this might all come crashing down.
Not all crashing down.
I knew a lot of people who lost all their clients in one day, or, who had these like really dramatic changes in their business. And I was really fortunate not to have that happen. But it did sort of motivate me to look at a few different marketing strategies and think about how I can make sure that the books are still getting out there and how I can still help my clients get their books out there as well. So sort of thinking a bit more about, okay, how do I increase the value of what I'm providing even more so that, a book is not an essential thing to have in a business, right? Like it's kind of a nice to have. So I wanted to sort of find a way that I could make it as appealing and definitely, something that people still want to go for, even when there's all of this external pressure. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about, how I can help people with the publication and launch process, going on more podcasts to sort of talk about the process instead of going to events and that kind of thing. So it definitely made me shift how I was approaching my participation in each project. But I think it's also meant for clients that they've had to be a little bit more creative about how they promote their book. So it's, one client has been going to every Barnes and Noble in her drivable area and saying, I will personally guarantee these books if you sell them for me. And so she's been like creating this little network of people who are hand selling her book in a time when more people are reading than ever. And, she is kind of building this real momentum around her book that probably she wouldn't have needed to do otherwise. And so that's been quite interesting. A lot of people are starting to explore how they do live events around their books, live Zoom signings of books. Do they send a copy of the book signed to all of the people who show up to a Zoom event? Honestly, we could talk all day about the number of ways you can market a book once it's been published. But I think the pandemic has definitely made people think, okay, got to get outside the box a little bit, got to, find other ways to connect with people. It's definitely made people be a little bit more creative about how they're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for myself, Laura, I've had to be, and many people that are listening have found themselves having to, one, be able to adapt, be able to pivot, and then be a little more creative expeditiously as the pandemic came about. And that's something that I've had to do is a lot of things with Zoom and trying to find creative ways to engage people virtually. And I think that's been the story of most people's lives the last 7-8 months or so. In terms of a budget for this, what could a business owner expect, Laura, in terms of what they need to bring to the table to really make this pop the way that they like to? Whether they're a new business owner and just kind of starting out, or if they've been in business for some time, what can they expect?
So budget-wise, there's a huge variety in what you will find with ghostwriters. I think people who are reasonably early in their career, you could expect sort of in the $10,000 range. For the ghostwriter who moves into your house for 2 years, that's probably closer to the 100,000 end of the spectrum. Right. I'm pretty squarely in the middle. I've got good experience, but as I said, I'm not coming to live with you. So I think, that's kind of a reasonable scale to have in mind. One thing I will say, just in terms of, people who are very early in their business, often a book is not the best strategy at that moment. It's great when you've been in business for a few years, you've got your processes dialed in, you kind of know what you're doing, you can handle a big uptick in lead flow, in customer support, and you're really clear on what you're wanting to offer, as well as having quite a high ticket item that you can sell on the back of it. So, as you heard from that scale, it's not a small investment to get a book written. And so what I want to see with clients is a pretty clear line to a return on that investment. So if I see, okay, you sell a $25,000, $40,000, $60,000 very high-end product, you need to sell one or two of those to recoup your cost on this project. That's a total no-brainer. If you're selling $20 widgets or whatever, you're going to need to sell a lot of those to make your cost back. And so I do want to see that people have the business model to support, their investment, and also that they've got the experience and the systems in place to handle the big influx of attention.
Yep, absolutely. Do you work with those that maybe they're not telling their own story or memoir, but maybe they want to write, fiction and things along that nature? Do you help in that regard, or are you mostly doing kind of memoir, almost documentary kind of style?
Yeah, I definitely stick on that more memoir kind of, as you say, documentary style of book. There are plenty of fiction ghostwriters out there, but the skill set actually for fiction writing and nonfiction, there's a lot of overlap, but there are some quite key differences in how those genres kind of play out. So if you're thinking about that stuff, I can find you the right person, but I'm probably not the person for you.
Yeah. What are some things, just from a writing skill set? We touched on this a little bit, Laura. From a writing skill set, what are some things that people can do to improve their writing? So that over time, and I think, by people working on their writing skill set, one, it helps all across the board with everything. I mean, like I said, we could talk another 10 hours about all the different things that, writing can benefit. But I think even in working with your ghostwriter, with someone like yourself, improving your writing skills, helps in that regard too. So, what are some things that people can do?
A key thing is to read, especially in the genre that you are interested in working with. So if you want to write memoir, read a lot of memoir. If you want to write thrillers, then read thrillers. But, those styles are completely different. And so what you take from the reading is going to be different. In the publishing world, we talk about read 2,000, write 2,000. So if you're going to sit down and try and write 2,000 words, which is, half a chapter, read half a chapter of something in a similar genre or similar style to what you're trying to do, because it'll just get you in the right headspace. It'll kind of get you in the rhythm of the genre. And so that's a really good way to kind of set yourself up to have an effective writing session. Another strategy is to, try and deconstruct what other writers are doing. So there's a book called Reading Like a Writer, which I really recommend. It sort of goes through and pulls apart what different writers are doing when they're crafting a piece that is really powerful or that has become quite famous. You can kind of reverse engineer what they've been doing so that when it comes to try something of your own like that, you kind of understand the technical aspects of what's happening. And then, the other stuff is to write often, doing it more frequently, and then thinking why, what's the gap between how I wanted that to come out and how it did come out. And sort of trying to sort of analyze that yourself, but also working with a coach. I just hired a coach myself for a book that I'm working on of my own. It's a bit more of a personal story, and it's kind of a bit of a diversion from what I've done before, but she's got a heap of experience with that type of book. And so even though I've worked on over 20 books, I know that having somebody who's really dialed in the format that I want to attempt next, is really helpful to do that. And so it's just, being open to getting help, honestly, and being willing to sort of try and learn from other people's hard-earned experience.
Absolutely. No, it definitely makes sense. Laura, for you personally, let's talk there, because what do you see next for yourself as you continue to develop your skill set, and you're working with your coach, and you're working with different, clientele and different customers? What do you see? What's kind of next on the horizon for you? As you
Big
see
question.
your career continue to go.
So, I mean, I love what I'm doing, and I think a kind of natural progression of this is looking more at legacy style books. So,
Sure.
to date, there's been a lot of sort of how I did this type books. You know, how I built this business, how I made it work, how I'm growing it, how I sold it. There's been a lot of that kind of thing. But the next sort of progression is people who are really established in their careers and maybe are coming to the end of a career and want to create a sense of legacy, and they're wanting to document everything they've learned, everything that they've done. You know, maybe they want to give it to their families, maybe they want to leave it as a kind of a North Star or guiding light for their employees in the company that they've built. You know, they're more focused on that memoir aspect rather than the nuts and bolts of how they build a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense. When you talk about that from a legacy standpoint, that, people reach a point in their life and in their career where they want to document that type of thing, leave it for the next generation, and kind of leave their mark, that would outlive them. Because as books are one of those assets that, for lack of a better term, they live forever, somewhere. Right. And then particularly with the advent of technology with Amazon and that sort of thing, books can kind of live forever. Laura, and speaking of Amazon, what are your thoughts on, just Amazon from a publisher standpoint? Has Amazon kind of just taken over, book publishing in a lot of ways? I mean, I know it's such a large marketplace, but what are your thoughts on just Amazon as it relates to, kind of your process and working with authors?
Amazon, I think, has been an incredible gift to the publishing industry in many ways. It's, of course, got its downsides, but I think it's made publishing so accessible to people who had something really important to say or wanted to try and be more creative or whatever, and it's given them a platform to do that. And so I'm very much in favor of the self-publishing model. I think also for a lot of people, it gives them just a huge amount of control that they would otherwise have to give up working with a traditional publisher. There's speed to market there, which is awesome. You can finish your book and have it listed, a day or two later for sale. Like, it's just made the whole process much faster, much more affordable, much more accessible. And so for all of those reasons, I really appreciate it. I do think Amazon, I think they're about 70% of the total book market now. So it's a huge, huge chunk. And, I think whether we start to see some antitrust leanings happening from, some of the governing bodies, we'll see what happens. But I think, for the moment, I can't see anybody else who can compete with them, just in terms of their distribution, their brand recognition. They've done a huge amount of stuff really right. And so I think that from the perspective of the industry, Amazon has been a massive thorn in the side. It's one of the really traditional old industries. It's full of the old white man who's been in the business and in the job forever and ever, and it's just perfectly happy with how it is. And so, it's been quite a tumultuous process for a lot of publishers to learn to play with this new kid on the block. And it's taken some time, and that was for me a motivating factor in going out on my own, because I just thought, you guys are on the wrong side of history on this one. You gotta change it up. So I think now, probably 10 to 15 years later, it's smoothed out a lot, and publishers have worked out this is here to stay, and we really need to learn to play ball with these guys. So there is now quite a good integration with Amazon and some of the other sort of smaller online publishers with the publishers. But I think on the whole, while of course there have been some downsides, I think Amazon's been just hugely beneficial to the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I published my book actually through Amazon back in 2015. And, I had, a good experience with them. It's very convenient. I was able to put together, my graphic for my, front and back cover, and, basically upload my writing. I mean, again, they made it very convenient. To me, the downside's always when the evil empire comes in and, takes it over markets. And like you talked about the antitrust stuff, Laura, I mean, they take a hell of a chunk, as well. And so while you have a little bit more control in terms of, how, like you say, your speed to market and that sort of thing, you lose a good bit of control with the way that they go about kind of the publishing and how they control the financial piece of it in exchange for that convenience. And so I know that's always the balance, right? How much control do you have on the financial side of the book against the conveniences that you're getting, and how that goes about. But, so I agree with all the positives that you said, as it relates, for them. And I think those will continue. And I think what's continued is that, like you say, that integration that I didn't really see that as much early on. They were kind of the, like you mentioned with kids, it's kind of that kid, the big kid that comes in the sandbox that's a few years older than everybody and starts throwing sand, is not really playing nice, and kind of takes the ball from everybody. And the other kids are like, hey, wait a minute, that's my ball. And it's like, no, it's mine now. And it's like, wait a minute. Okay. Now we got to learn to play with this big kid now that's in the sandbox. Yeah. And I think now, people have learned how to play with that kid, now that's in the sandbox, and I think that kids learn to, not throw sand in people's eyes and, hog the monkey bars and all that type of thing. And so, I think that as that continues to hopefully smooth out, you just don't want that kid to get too big in that sandbox. And that's always the concern is, when everybody in the sandbox is 5 and then the 11-year-old shows up and it's like, oh, wait a minute, that's not right. So, as we have this conversation and kind of wrap up, Laura, what, are just some best practices that you use, for yourself, or that you've seen work for others that will work for this audience? The big thing I always like for our listeners here with the MYB community to take away is, what can they go implement, right? And how can they make that step wherever they are? They may have the budget to call you after they get done listening and get the process started. They may, be at a point where it's like, God, I'd love to be able to work with someone like Laura, but, I don't have the budget right now. And so, and even before you get to all of that, just the mindset that it takes to undergo and have your project be successful for you. What are some things that work for you that you think will work for others?
I think the mindset you want to bring to any book project is that this is a long-term asset. This is the real estate buy. It's not the penny stocks that you're trying to, just make right. a quick edge on. It's going to take a little while to get it done, and it's going to take a little while for it to pay off. So if you start with that in mind and just know that it's a slow process, then that's going to take a lot of the edge off any frustration that you're having with it. But sure. In terms of something practical that you can do, a lot of people jump into the writing of a book before the idea is fully clarified in their mind. Yeah. And that just leads to a lot of rework. It leads to frustration and a sort of a sense of failure. And you want to avoid that, especially early on in the process. So the most important thing you can do if you're thinking about starting a book is to spend all the time that you want to sit down writing at the start and just focus on what you're actually trying to communicate. So distill it down to a sentence that you could tell somebody and immediately have them get what you're going to be talking about and why it's valuable to them. So I call this a North Star idea. In other genres, you would call it the premise. It's kind of the big guiding principle for what this project is going to be. And the reason this is so valuable is that it gives you a filter you can pass all of your information through. So often people run into trouble in books because they're trying to cram everything they know about a subject into this one book. Yeah. But often a lot of that information doesn't belong in this book. It's not bad information. It's just not right for this project. It doesn't fit this premise or this North Star idea. So having that very clearly defined gives you a very quick yes, no filter. Does this information belong in this book? Is this going to help the reader internalize that key message that I'm trying to send them away with? And if the answer is no, you can save it for later, discard it, put that aside. You don't need to worry about that anymore. Just focus on the stuff that's a yes. And so once you've got that idea very clearly defined, you can go and build an outline. And I think this step feels tedious, but it's really, really useful later on. So would recommend not skipping it. I do this for all of the books that I work on, is building just a structure for the information, how you want to lay it out, in what order, what needs to be included. So, maybe you start with 10 to 15 kind of big ideas that you want to cover, and then niche down. So what are some key points that I need to make here? And then niche down again. What are the specific stories I'm going to tell? What's the research I need? So you kind of get this iterative outline for the book. So you get a pretty detailed structure by the end of that process, but it means that you can just go straight into writing, and you're never stuck looking at a page being like, ugh, what am I writing about today?
Right.
You never want to have that moment where the cursor's just blinking at you, being like, you've been sitting here for 15 minutes looking at Facebook. This is not really writing. So, having an outline saves you from that kind of inertia and the resistance to getting started. So having that very practical jump off point will make the whole process much, much easier.
Yep. Excellent. And so, Laura, how can people get in touch with you? For those that are listening that, have questions or, would like to, discuss further with you, utilizing your ghostwriting service, how can they get in touch with you?
So my website is lauraiswriting.com, and you can get a free copy of How to Write This Book over there. If you just pop your email address in, I'll email that straight over to you. But yeah, the website is kind of the hub of where everything happens. So get me through that.
Yep, absolutely. So that's lauraiswriting.com. That's in the show notes, MYB. So you can click right there and go straight to Laura's website, connect with her there, and let her know that you heard her right here on the Minding Your Business podcast, and get the free resource there, her free book. That's a great asset for you. And definitely will help you going forward. So Laura Gale's our guest today here on episode 216. Laura, this has been tremendous. I've learned a lot. I've been able to take some notes on some things. And as I look at my next opportunity, would love to be able to reach out to you and kind of, see where opportunities lie, for my next book. I'm not quite at the point where I'm ready to write my legacy book yet, so I won't help you there. As someone that's coming up on 40, hopefully I've got a good bit to add to my story.
Yeah, I think so.
Over time. But definitely would love to connect with you on kind of that next project, and hopefully others that are listening will do as well. But thank you so much, and best wishes to you and family, and look to remain connected.
Thank you so much, Ron. This has been really fun. I appreciate it.
Yep. Excellent. Laura Gale, our guest today. Go to lauraiswriting.com, MYB. Make sure you do that as soon as you get done listening to this episode. Again, make sure you connect with me. champronbrooks.com is where you can learn more about me, learn more about my various ventures, and communicate with me. Would love to hear from you, your thoughts on this episode or other episodes of the podcast. Any feedback you have for me, good, bad, or ugly. I'd love to be able to hear that. And that always helps me to be just a little bit better. Speaking of being a little bit better, we are, and of course, Laura doesn't, maybe follow this quite as much, and that's probably good kudos for her. But we have the presidential election coming up tomorrow. We're recording this again on November the 2nd. Tomorrow is election day. Listen, MYB, at the end of the day, I'm not going to get into candidates and all this type of thing, but remember that, it doesn't cost you anything to be kind. I think a lot of times we get so caught up into the ideology of politics, and then we let that filter into every other piece of our lives, and we use that to make judgments on other people, on what we think that they are, what we think they believe, or that sort of thing. And we've become very polarized in that dichotomy. And so I encourage you, as you go forward, no matter what happens on election day or the results of the election, and whether your candidate is the one that ultimately wins that job or your candidate does not win that job. At the end of the day, there are three things that unite us all, no matter how we look in the mirror, right? No matter what side of the train tracks we come from, no matter what country we come from. We all want to be a little better for ourselves, a little better for our families, and a little better for our communities. And if we can do that, we can all be a little bit better together, for the environment and that sort of thing as a whole. And so, maybe spend a little bit less time on Twitter, arguing back and forth with, Twitter profile pics. about ideologies and things like that. Maybe do like Laura and I've talked about today, but go read a book. And do something maybe a little bit more constructive than arguing on Facebook and Twitter about, political ideology and things like that. And remember, if you're looking to launch your business, that's where you want to spend most of your focus anyway. So you want to make sure you have your focus in the right areas, because here's the thing: no matter what happens with that, you're still gonna have to wake up in the morning. You're still going to have to do your routine, and nothing's going to happen unless you go make it happen. All right. So that has nothing to do with who's in the White House and that sort of thing. So I wanted to share that with you guys as we close this particular episode, as we're right on the presidential election, the cusp of it. And, I have no idea what's going to happen. It's going to be interesting. I'll be watching it just like you guys. And it'll be intriguing to see who wins and then how things move forward, particularly in light of this pandemic. But again, we all want to be a little better for ourselves, a little better for our families, and a little better for our communities. And keep that in mind as you interact with every person. And we'll all make this place just a little bit better. So listen, Champ Ron, the Minding Your Business podcast. Take care and go be great.